All right. Well, it's 4 o'clock on March 31st, and that means that this is the Great War Discussion Group. The speaker for this afternoon is Stephen Dietz, and the topic, as you can see from the screen, is conspiracy theories. Now, conspiracy theories have been with us probably for 4 or 5 thousand years. But the early 20th century was an especially fertile period because you had the combination of much better communication, mass media, and the existence of real, honest to God, secret conspiracies. So, Stephen is going to tell us what some of the conspiracy theories were that circulated around the First World War. Stephen, you're on.
And welcome to another hour of mirth and frivolity provided by me. Um, I hope you don't mind. I sort of always tried to start the show with a bit of entertainment, and I enjoy doing mashups of period correct, and so this one is one that I've created to give you a slightly different view of a battlefield scene. And thus ends my week or my entertainment for you. This is a topic that could easily fill books. And as Charlie and I talked about before this started, the presentation as a whole is an overview because there's so many books that provide pro of the conspiracy theories to basically trying to debunk them that I'm just going to try provide relevance to the war and an overview of conspiracy theories. And we'll look at causality and the perspective of the cause, but there's also a consistency with the conspiracy theory in general. So there are multiple conspiracy theorems. This is just one of the many that I found. And so the logic is that when a person who is a leader or is identified as a leader provides the believable information of facts or near facts in their community or their group as a whole, and that interaction communication supports those individuals' functional beliefs, it creates an information that seems real even when it's totally false. And a conspiracy and the conspiracy theory may then be born. Not all conspiracies actually happen, but that's not to say that they usually do, just if they're egregious enough. And there are some common generalities as a whole why we have a need to believe in conspiracies. As Charlie made a comment, they go back thousands of years, but there's most individuals have a need for leadership and identified leadership who can provide facts or near facts, and that they provide that sense of community, and that their interaction it helps sustain or provide functional beliefs. So, how does a conspiracy theory start? It could be a subjective observation by a person with a bias. Let's just use the anarchist view of the world, where you have to destroy the world and destroy government to make a new world. Or you have the rumor, whether it's substantiated or unsubstantiated. The one I still think is amazing, it's going on even through today, was, well, Oswald was not alone in the JFK assassination. I'm not sure which way to believe myself, but as a whole, this rumor continues to this day, and so it creates a conspiracy of there were other elements involved. And then you can have conspiracies created with a purpose or intent. William Randolph Hearst and the Yale journalism of the New York Journal World in the newspaper of before the Spanish American War coined the phrase "Remember the Maine" after the Maine blew up in Havana Harbor, and that literally that motto and such created the impetus to help spur the Americans into being enthusiastic about the war. And then you can have misinterpretation of an event or a fact. And that one could be like the Eye of Providence. And the Eye of Providence is found on money and similar symbols, such as the dollar bill. And that many times it was associated with Masons and Freemasonry, where the reality is that the Eye of Providence was actually created and involved 16 years prior before Freemasons decided to use it. And then as stamps for Remember the Maine for the 260 that were killed from the explosion. And then you have the anarchists as a whole. And finally, Lee Harvey Oswald. But the issue is, which is the better way to believe for a conspiracy, your typical conception of the anarchist or an anarchist in real life? The Oklahoma City bombers, Timmy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, generally looked and acted normal, but were incensed and enraged by their belief that the Waco was a government suppression and infringed on their Second Amendment rights. There are some consistent elements, though, with any conspiracy or conspiracy theory. There's usually an us against them or them against us, and it's usually consistent that it's there. And then there's a specific, but it could be a nebulous enemy of some type. And there's always some type of hidden or suppressed truth. And then because of that truth, there's these secrets that the other side, the enemy or whoever, has, and that there's a hidden motive of why they're doing this. And then there's this circular logic as a whole, and then the interrelated, non associated evidence that goes along with it. Now, when we think about us against them, there's many theories as well about why humans have this innate competitive nature, whether we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, sports rivalries, a cold that progresses to a hot war, or even cultural or societal teaching. But it's the issue is that this can create animosity or fear when even none is warranted. And this continues on locally to this day in some ways, where you consider that there's still this rivalry of some people between Kansas and Missouri that whether we're talking General Order Number 11 as seen by the bottom painting or the John Stuart Curry in the upper, that there's this animosity by Kansans towards Missourians because of Quantrill Raiders or the order for expulsion of Jackson County in 1863, that it literally has transcended through today. Then there's the enemy, known or not. And, this is the next step of us versus them. And them has become the enemy. And that, as I said before, the enemy may or may not be specifically defined. It could be an individual, it could be an organization, it could be a religion, it could be an entity, it could be an entire race. All could be an enemy. And these people may then also have perceptions of sympathizers who then get turned into enemies as well, even though they may have nothing to do with the event, whether we're talking Pinkos during the 1950s and 60s or German Kansans in 1917 and 18. Consider Alexander Walter. In February of 18, he was living at the National Military Home in Leavenworth, Kansas, 90 years old, and he has to register with his photo taken as a member of the Enemy Aliens Registration Act. Then you have the hidden or suppressed truth. What is truth gets muddied and then discarded in any conspiracy theory. What may start as a potential kernel of reality gets turned into something. If everybody remembers the game of gossip, where somebody whispers something in a person's ear and it goes down the line, it literally becomes that type of scenario as the conspiracy evolves and becomes far more dangerous and far more complex as time goes along. And so propaganda, the rumors, and gossip can all meld into what those people consider truth. And their details can be extrapolated from their fear or misread details like the game of gossip. And one of the really good examples was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was published in 1903, first in Imperial Russia. And it was immediately translated, interestingly enough, because of the racist overtones, into multiple language, and that it was published internationally as well. And it had a following, whether we're talking the United States, Europe, Britain, and that believed it as truth. And this document was considered accurate and truthful through even through some of the people today that believe it's not been disproven, even though it was disproven not unfortunately until 1921 by British newspapers who did the step-by-step research about it and found that it was plagiarized from multiple prior tracks, and then also had contradictory details that of things that couldn't have happened at the same time, and found that it was a total falsehood. And the German press did the same thing in 1931. But once a document such as the protocols was published, it transcended time into a much more long-term document. And then you also have the secrets or hidden motive. And this is similar to the conspiracy truth, but there's an assumption and promotion that there's some hidden agenda with secrets that they're keeping or to be discovered. And propaganda, rumors, gossip may help insinuate and describe the potential motives. And pamphlets or plays or books may be an espouser of the motives. A good example would be the 1918 play, The Hidden Hand. And if you look at the poster itself, the play poster, you see in the background the scythe of death flying over the ruins of a city and with dead bodies in the foreground. And then a individual with a pickelhaube helmet that is to be the Kaiser standing over a British lord, and that the logic was is that there were German sympathizers in Britain that were royalty or such was the gist of the play. But it wasn't just the play that had this sort of scenario. There was also the Black Hand in the upper corner, and then the war profiteers, and then finally the Merchants of Death, the political cartoon down on the bottom, which is hard to see in some ways, but it's vultures that land in on the ground and turn into industrialists who are following the death, who is marching with a shako and a baton and medals on his bony breast. When we talk about the circular logic, it's a closed box or circular logic, and that in these type of scenarios, it's a fishbowl, and that it just continues to churn and turn into their own with their own beliefs and such. And so the conspiracy theory becomes true no matter what you present for those individuals who are believers, and they're fixated on the details at hand, and any counterpoints are ignored as they don't fit into their perceived facts at hand. And the evidence of these facts are if A, then B, and if B, then A, and round and round and round you go. To go along with this is the interrelated non-associated evidence. And the way I always think of this idea is you have a bunch of drunk fraternity guys in college sitting around drinking beer, and they start talking and chatting, or they're at a bar, and they come up with all these disparate points, and they say, oh yeah, and this happened with this, and that there may not be any association with what they're talking about, but they become believers because the combination of the alcohol and everything else. And it's like I said, the evidence may not be based on anything that contradicts. It just is woven into a belief system, and they create a model that may be accurate but incorrect for the final result. And usually, these are always, at least what I've discovered for that period, they're sewn in with a distrust of authority or anything that contradicts their view. And at the same time, a good example for this would be a Rorschach ink blot. What do you see? And taking the various different points of that, some might see a face, some might see a winged insect, some might see a whole flurry of different things, but none of them are necessarily correct. But because the way it's woven together, they all are correct. And then, as a whole, the core tenet of the conspiracy theorist is I want to believe. And so when you think in terms of the show, The X Files from the 90s, this, everything I just described were the tenets of the script theme for almost all the shows. They want to believe, whether it's UFOs or whether it is some type of government conspiracy or whatever. So let's move forward to the conspiracy theories of 1900 to 1919. There were both major and minor conspiracy theories, and that some had a time limitation. They were either proven or disproven over time, and an update from events. But some were just local or regional in nature, while others were global. And the ones that were global were generally driven by racist or national biases or overtones. There were three different conspiracy eras of the war, and it makes sense when you think about it. There's the pre-war, during the war, and then post-war. The conspiracies, some can span from the pre-war through the post-war, and even into much longer periods of time into the 30s and even the 40s. But they were many times, some of them had different agendas or opposing viewpoints from what they were during the pre-war period to what they were after the war. during the pre-war, the conspiracy rumors were generally pro-war, which is interesting because they were based on the fear, the nationalist attitudes, and the media of the tracts, the sermons, the newspapers promoted similar themes, and that it will be their fault and their demise if they attack us, and that we must have the war to show our strength. And it's us versus them. Many of these conspiracy theories basically go around these tenets of logic, and that there's some type of reason that it's happening. And even in America, the idea of the anarchists and the Reds pre during the war, and if you notice the invading army of Reds in 1912 drive back the blue lines and opening to mimic war, and that the outrage that comes from that because of the Reds, even though that it was the logic of it potentially from the Confederacy as well, but the Blues were the ones that won in the end. And then you have up above the from the Lapid Journal in the document there, you have the anti-war demonstrators being bullied with batons and such by the military, who were saying you were wrong, and that literally it was like a pogrom against the anti-war protesters in 1913. And then we come to the war, and peace is refused by France, of course, and her army is ready to strike. The conspiracy theories during the war were generally fear based as well. But, the prime example was who really killed Franz Ferdinand. There were some that believed that it was not really the Black Hand, but it was other were underwriting or trying to get the Black Hand to act on their behalf. And those that they said were doing it were the Freemasons or the Catholics to bring down. It was always some other group that, and not an anarchist itself. And most others were based on events such as the Lusitania sinking. The Germans were trying to present the conspiracy that and propaganda that there were munitions on all ships, and that there was also the attitude by some that was promoted that it was an event that the British did it. The British actually caused the ship to be sunk because it would help get the United States involved in the war sooner and turn America against Germany that much faster. And then you have in Russia the Tsar's life with Rasputin, who was supposedly mesmerizing and hypnotizing the czars, and while the Tsarina was definitely influenced by him, there were these theories that the Tsar was actually making more plans with Rasputin's help. And then there were events that were unfortunate. There was the events associated with hunger or even mutinies. And these happened both uh, during the early stages and later in the war. But there were accusations of punitive rationing and punitive denials. In Austro Hungary, it was going against those refugees down in southern Europe, and in Germany, it was against the Belgians. And that the reality is that much of the time, because of the blockade, the Germans and the Austro-Hungary did not have enough, literally did not have enough supplies to feed their own, and that they were working on ersatz rations themselves among the population. So when you look at the different, you have the Lusitania sinking, and that it was not Germany's fault that it was sunk; it was someone else's. Or the Franz Ferdinand being shot, that it wasn't the Black Hand that did it; it had to be someone else. Then Rasputin, or here we have Hoover's United States Food Administration trying to assist in fighting starvation in Belgium. And then you have the conspiracy theories after the war. These conspiracies were generally based more on anger and frustration that from the results of the war and such. And that in Germany, probably the primary was the stab in the back myth and stab in the back scenario, where they felt like the politicians who were forced into signing the armistice at Versailles, did not uh, just do it unwillingly. They were, with secret communiques, and they were basically going and thinking that they were being secret deals that were also done to weaken Germany, and that these industrialists would take advantage of it. The French, in France, it was much more of class based, and it was that the rich did not really contribute to the war, and that there was this anger about the process of that we'll talk in a few moments about the industrialists and the war profiteers that made rich over the general public. And then there were most others, like I said, were based on profiteering and political events. A good example also was the Soviets were not willing to definitely say that they had murdered the Tsar's family because they were afraid of the repercussions at time. And then, of course, the merchants of death and war profiteers. Now, what is interesting is that there was also the events associated with communism, Bolshevism, because if you remember the short videos I did by Ford in some of my prior presentations, was that it was showing Bolsheviks eating the rats, were eating the profits and the productivity of America. And I nearly redid that video just to show how they were using this as a propaganda piece. So here you see the war profiteers again, the Tsar's family, and that Anastasia was actually alive afterwards as well, and then the stab in the back. So let's talk about the global and international conspiracies. There were the ones that instigated and caused the war. These were like the Jewish cabal that was causing it. The hidden hand, which is far more encompassing. The merchants of death were such as Zaharov and Vickers and such, and Freemason, Illuminati, and Bolshevism, which is, we'll talk about that in a moment, being identical. The Jewish cabal, if you think in terms of the premise that I was presenting earlier, of us against them, it was that they are different, and that they shun us because they don't want to intermarry, and we don't want to marry them, and that and they were considered the enemy because of the being the murder of Christ and various age-old pogroms and racist hatred. The truth, the Protocols of Zion was the primary document of the period to promote that truth, and that a secret society of Jews would rule the world and cause the problems. Now, at the same time, there was the Balfour Agreement in 1917, and this actually helped provide ammunition to those that believed there were Jewish cabals, because they thought that it manipulated the British government to influence and issue a declaration in exchange for Jewish support in bringing the United States on the side of the Allies. And so, lots of times it's all boiled up into the same logic. Then there's the secrets and hidden motive, once again showing what I described earlier, but they want to rule and revenge for all the things that we have done to them. And the circular logic of where does their money go and why do they do this to us? They must use it because they want to dominate us in the end. And then there are other evidence were, like I said, the Balfour Agreement, and then the DuPonts and the Rothschilds and others that had extreme wealth. the hidden and unseen hand, there were more than just, the primary topic of the unseen hand, as you saw in that play, was Britain being the unseen hand being manipulated by Germany. But there were unseen hand logic and conspiracies in the United States, in France, in Germany, as well as Britain, that there were other people that this, whether they were the Freemasons or some other group, the Illuminati, controlling things in the background, or the Catholics. I mean, the list gets longer and longer, and that it's always us against them, and that they have a need. They're jealous of us, and that in this case with Germany being jealous of Great Britain. And there's the truth. The anti-royalists and anti-Catholic and similar tracts were really promoting how there was something going on, and the anti-Catholic element was very prominent in this other unseen hand against the Freemasons and such. And when it talks about the anti-royalists, they want to continue their rule and the revenge against the Protestants, and that the idea that they inspire the anarchists to do their bidding is sort of funny, because it's always that they've somehow manipulated the anarchists to be the ones as their tools. And their evidence is that all the royals were interrelated, and that, like, uh, Wilhelm was, related to Victoria, and on and on. And then the idea that all of these elites would cause the various different things to maintain their power. And then we have the merchants of death and the war profiteers. And this was more against, happened after the war, but it began actually during the war, and the frustration with the rich as a whole, and that these were talking about the super rich munition industrialists, whether we were talking DuPont, Zaharov, considered the merchant of death, Krupp Arms Works, Warburg, who was the chief banker in Germany, as well as Vickers in Britain. All of these were going to profit off of continued war. And so you'd see this truth in the anti industrialist tracts that were published on the slide throughout. And generally, these were published by not just anarchists and Bolsheviks. There were others that were of the various other revolutionaries of the time. But the Merchants of Death the term did not really happen until 1934. And it gains traction for this Merchants of Death with the US Senate Nye Committee, and that it was known as the Special Committee on the Investigation of the Munitions Industry. And Senator Gerald Nye investigated whether arms manufacturers unduly influenced the U.S. involvement in the war. And they found evidence of profiteering, but it did not conclusively prove that these industries deliberately pushed the war effort and deliberately pushed the United States into the war. This also, because of the Nye Committee, increased from that the public reaction. There was increased pacifism during the 30s because of the result of the Nye Committee. Then we talk about the Illuminati or the Freemasons or the Catholics. And I mean, it goes on in regards to this, but it goes back to what I described earlier as the hidden hand. These were the secret societies versus non members, and that whether we were talking Masonic order, some of the Catholic orders that were available, the Illuminati as a whole, and that the truth were sermons from Catholics to Bolsheviks that were talking anti secret society. The Jesuits is another example. Money, power, and control was always the motive. And once again, they're everywhere. Just look at the secret handshakes and their meeting places. And they have hidden signs everywhere in the architecture and the money and such. Now, what's interesting about secret societies is that all of these groups had their own secret societies, and that the Bolsheviks were, in a sense, a secret society before the whole communist revolution, because of the way that they were trying to take over everything. But they tried to. The logic was is that all these groups, in their own way, manipulated events behind the scene, and that global power brokers directed the course as a whole. And German propaganda had a whole created of you know anti-Masonic sentiment, and they were viewed with a in the same way as Catholics by the Protestants in Germany. Now, this one I find rather amusing that there was this attitude and logic by industrialists, especially, that the Bolshevists and the Bolsheviks and anarchists are the same group, the reality, and that they're all trying to take over us and ruin the world for it. And so it was obvious by their documents, and as I said, the Ford for the Ford animations that were put out as a whole, and that the motive as a whole, once again, is that they want to, whether we're talking the Comintern or the Freikorps in Germany, they want to take over the world or continue to have the country in their control. On a national level, in every country, there were these conspiracies that there were these Judases or government betrayals that were happening. This is why we are losing the battles, and this is why, and that there's something going on that we have no control over, and that those spies are everywhere, and that these people are doing nothing but profiteer promotions. And over again, you would when I was doing my research, it spanned across multiple different countries, with the same theme, and it was almost identical whether we were talking Britain or America. That there were, somewhere there are these government betrayals and such. It's interesting though that the government betrayals as a whole did not occur in the United States until after the war because they thought that mostly associated with profiteering, and that the invaders had secret plans to take over. And when the French was losing the battle during the attack in 1914 and the Schifflin Plan, the French were thought that it has to be we're being betrayed. There are traitors in the midst. When it wasn't that, it was just the overwhelming position of the Germans at the time. So let's talk about Kansas and the German population because it's an interesting little subtopic. In the 1870s, 1880s, the largest European group to emigrate to Kansas were Germans, and these were German Mennonites and German Catholics, and they predominated the emigres into Kansas at that point. And then there were also the Volga Germans. The Volga Germans, for those that don't know, were the Germans that first emigrated to the Volga Valley in Russia and then felt that they were not able to express their religious freedom in the Volga Valley. And so they proceeded to emigrate to the United States in western Kansas. And so it's another separate group of Germans. And so at the time, there were as many as 60 German language newspapers prior to 1914, 1915 time period in the state of Kansas. And in Bethel College and Tabor College in central Kansas, general college courses were taught in the German language. And we're not talking teaching how to speak German. These were things like chemistry, mathematics, that were being taught in German to the students. So immediately before the war, the Mennonites as a whole were concerned, and they were very pro peace and wanted to maintain the. They did not want to be involved in the war, and the American German Bund promoted that and tried to keep this attitude happening right up until the war. So when the war happens, there was this suddenly this spies everywhere conspiracy throughout the state of Kansas, and that Kansas Germans, if they're not spies, they must be slackers or avoiders, and that they aren't contributing to the war effort, which in the reality was not the case at all. The Germans were actually trying to go out of their way to prove that they were patriotic Americans, but there was German colleges and towns, the towns that were not German were very suspicious of those towns that were primarily German populations at the time. And then you have the Enemy Alien Registration Act that was passed by the US government. And so let's go back again to poor Alexander Walter. And once again, he's 90 years old. He emigrated to the United States in 1860 to fight in the Civil War, was a Civil War veteran, came back to Kansas, was a farmer the rest of his life, was involved in a number of civic activities, proceeded to, when he was too old to be taken care of by his family, went to the American, I shouldn't say, the National Military Home in Leavenworth, Kansas, and he's 90 years old. And then, because of the way the act is, he has to have his picture taken and then be considered an enemy alien and registered that, even though that he's 90 years old. He doesn't live to past 1919, but it speaks to the conspiracy that all Germans were bad of that period. So, to summarize, my attempt with these slides was that conspiracy and conspiracy theories are not new, and during the war may have had some basis in truth, but as a whole, they really did not have anything but more being dependent upon prejudice, racism, and nationalism. And these in turn created numerous conspiracy theories. Now, as I said at the very beginning, creating a conspiracy theory is much easier than having it die, and even when it's shown to be false. And that I think using both the protocols of Zion, as it was shown to be a falsehood and a document that had no basis in fact, it still is referenced today. And in the same sense, the whole thing of whether Oswald acted alone or had help still continues today. Some conspiracies end up being true, but the majority, in my opinion, are false. So, with that said, I hope you enjoyed this, and I have any questions you might have.
Very good, Stephen. That's a great outline of the currents that were swirling around. The whole Merchants of Death thing actually goes back to a Frenchman, Jules Verne, who wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, one of whose major themes was the international conspiracy of munitions manufacturers. If any of you have seen the movie, you can attest to that. But it was there in the original book, which was written, I think, about 1870.
1869 or 1870, yes. I nearly referenced that, but I thought it was a little bit pre-war, so I didn't.
Well,
But
it
yes,
gives you an idea of the degree to which these theories were highly robust. They could be the people that believed in them spent a lot of time believing in them, and they hung on for a long time.
I'm sort of interested in right now. I mean, you said that one thing that helped conspiracy theories during the period of the First World War is the expansion of media and communication and whatnot. Well, now we have, we access information, if you will, so many different ways. We have algorithms that sort of steer us in one direction or another, depending upon what we seem to be interested in, and then we have whole broadcast outlets that are divided to one side or the other. I mean, are we in a bonanza of conspiracy theories, or does it take more to become actual conspiracy theories than what we're seeing now?
I think you're actually spot on, because the reason why I did the presentation was because of the onslaught of conspiracy theories that we see in the world today. And that at the same time, there was a revolution of communication that was starting to happen. You know, the telegraph had occurred, and telephone had voice communication was really starting to really take hold throughout the world. And at the same time, radio was in its infancy and had not really started broadcast for entertainment or for news, but still, it created the transmission of details. And so people would hear a partial thing of that the czar's dead. No, he's not. You know, and literally you wouldn't know who to believe in the end.
Plus, there was the print media. Wasn't that an explosion of print media during the First World War era?
There was, but it actually exploded back, at least in the United States, during, they call it the golden 1890s, when the yellow journalism, they were literally doing everything they could. The whether yellow journalism of William Randolph Hearst, but there were the others that were the Pulitzers and the various others that were coming in. And so the war of media was still going on into the First World War, but it was, you know, whether we're talking Britain, you know, had the Daily Mail, all these different newspapers that carry on through today were really, you know, just everywhere at that time.
Thanks, Steve. It was very insightful for me, your talk. So
thank you.
Well, I think if that's it.